They call it football, we call it soccer, whatever you call it. What's the U.S. Department of Justice doing policing this international sport? And that and a number of other issues that you're talking about there are subjects today on the academics. Our panel is minus 2 of our regular members. They're on vacation. So with me today, my colleague in the Department of Government and Justice Studies, Nancy Love, and a good friend in the History Department at ASU, Michael Wade. Mike, what's your thought about FIFA?
Well, if you had asked, to some extent you're asking the wrong person, but if you had said the name Sepp Blatter to me 2 weeks ago, I might have guessed that it was a medical
disease.
But with respect to Mr. Blatter, it seems to me there are 3 possibilities. He's part of the bribery and extortion that they're investigating. He knew and ignored it, or he was ignorant of it altogether, and none of them bespeak capable leadership. In a larger sense, I think that it represents the corrupting influence of big-time professionalized spectator sports that are controlled by largely unregulated parent bodies with their matches disseminated by sponsor-funded media giants like ESPN. And that's a larger issue that goes all the way down to things like Thursday night football on academic campuses. This is probably one we ought to watch and see how things develop with the FIFA question.
Well, part of it is too that the banks of the U.S., or at least some of the banks, apparently have been implicated in money laundering. Thus, the U.S. connection with the whole thing. But it's obviously an issue that's going to be on people's minds for a long time. And FIFA's not going anywhere. If you're not that familiar with FIFA, it's a $5 billion business and thus has an international dimension to it that's really quite important to know about. And I think as foot, as it's called in Europe, becomes a little bit more interesting and widespread in the U.S., FIFA will become a more important topic for us to give some thought to, would be my guess. Slight shift of emphasis, if I may.
Sure.
Did the outcome of the referendum in Ireland surprise you?
It certainly did. I perhaps had underestimated the Irish people. 62% of Irish voters approved marriage equality, and that's in a country that is 85% Catholic. And by referendum, Ireland has now joined 19 other countries, the only country, though, that has approved marriage equality by referendum. It is important, I think, to recognize that 40% of voters did not turn out and that marriage equality has not yet been implemented. But nonetheless, we need to ask how Ireland did this. And there's some interesting... That was going to be my
follow-up. What brought this about?
Right. Well, in part, a decline in the authority of the Catholic Church because of recent and ongoing sex scandals. I think also, though, an extremely effective campaign by those who supported marriage equality, and effective for multiple reasons. And it was a broad goal of the equality of people in Ireland that was carried into the campaign for marriage equality. And the supporters reached out to more traditional and to older voters. They had a Call Your Granny campaign, urging adult children to call their grandparents and urge them to vote for marriage equality. They also separated the question of marriage equality from other issues of child and family relationships, such as adoption and surrogacy, which perhaps made it easier for some voters to get behind the measure. And then there was bipartisan political support, which may have been the most important factor. The church is still arguing in opposition and has claimed that the whole campaign confused two different issues, the definition of marriage, which is between a man and a woman.
But is it fair to say that the Pope has been fairly quiet on this?
The Pope has been fairly quiet. The Irish Archbishop has not.
And another personality altogether.
Yes.
Yeah.
Maybe the Pope hasn't been as quiet as we think. He was asked about being gay, and by extension about gay marriage, gay relationships, and he said, and I think I'm quoting, who am I to judge?
Well, yeah.
That's interesting.
He took, one could say he was somewhat neutral on it. I'm not sure neutral is the right word, but it appeared to be a kind of neutrality. He really didn't make a statement for or against.
I'm guessing, of course, but he said, in effect, judge not, lest you be judged,
Right.
which may have opened the way for some people.
Is that an original comment with you?
I think it's biblical, actually.
That's a powerful statement.
All right.
And close to the only one I know.
Yeah. Well, what are the implications for the U.S., though?
Well, that's an interesting question.
My question.
Yes.
What do you think?
What do you guys think on that one?
Well, 36 states have already, in one wise or another, approved gay marriage. I think this may be one of the places in American politics where the federal system is working.
One of the few places.
One of the few places.
Yeah, one could say it that way. That is interesting that the states have taken the initiative in the American system rather than the national legislature or the Congress and the White House, et cetera. There is that difference, which I find fascinating.
Let's hope it's a trend.
Yeah. One thing, too, I gather from something I looked at the other day, that young voters were really mobilized.
Yes.
And had a significant effect on the outcome. Is that reasonably accurate?
That is the case, and in fact, some voters, because absentee ballots are not permitted on Irish referenda, actually returned to Ireland in order to cast their vote because they were carrying dual citizenship and living
I saw something from
elsewhere.
New York that people were flying out of New York, going home to vote. Yeah,
Incredible commitment.
That's really interesting. Yeah. Well, it'll be interesting to see if that has any effect on American politics or UK politics.
I can say this, based on some first-hand information, people in the gay community were ecstatic here in the United States over the vote.
Yeah.
Slight shift of emphasis and focus. Since our 2016 election is getting a lot of attention in various parts of this universe, what do you think about this issue of who the candidates are likely to be? And ultimately, the question that I want to ask is, will it really make any difference? You want to start, Mike?
Two things.
Okay.
It may make a difference if the candidates are not Hillary Clinton and Jeb Bush.
Are you thinking that that might not be the case?
I am not.
Okay.
I'm expecting that it probably will. But if that's the case, then I don't think it'll make any difference at all. Both of those candidates have already, in effect, been anointed by the financial community here in the United States. The head of Goldman Sachs said just last week that either Jeb Bush or Hillary Clinton would be acceptable to the financial community. And that coming from the head of a company which was at the center of the causes of the financial meltdown in 2008, I think Americans should find profoundly disturbing. The other thing is that we here in the United States, we invest 2 years now, most of 2 years, and millions of dollars in a lengthy campaign to elect a person that many people imagine will somehow make things right again. And at the same time, we go out and elect and re-elect a dysfunctional Congress. So I'm not sure that we're going to see much different in the final analysis.
You said a dysfunctional Congress. What is the cause or the source, as you see it, of that dysfunction?
Money.
Okay.
In my view, the members of Congress represent moneyed interests more than they represent their constituents. And I think one measure of that is the extent to which the gap between the so-called super rich and the rest of the country has grown to now really unprecedented proportions.
What's your sense of what people like Bernie Sanders, what impression or influence people like Bernie Sanders might have on this debate, this dialogue, if any?
I think that the potential, and I honestly don't know the answer to that question, but I think that what he offers, what Martin O'Malley from Maryland might offer, is an opportunity for American voters to think about some of the real issues facing this country, which the candidates that we, aside from those two thus far, don't talk about. We've got real problems in this country, and they're not the problems that are being addressed by the candidates.
Is there anyone out there other than, say, O'Malley or Sanders, you think, that has that agenda? Since their chances are
she's not running,
obviously slight.
But Elizabeth Warren,
who's decided not to run.
and I believe her when she says she's not running. I would be stunned if she wound up.
I think it's too late now for her to announce anyway.
If I could jump in,
sure, please.
The issue of Congress and dysfunction, I think it is money. I think it's also partisanship, though, and polarization of the parties, which is being reinforced now by gerrymandering and redistricting. So even if the presidential election carries some coattails for either victor, it may not make a whole lot of difference for the Democrats in the House, because they won't be able to take districts that have been gerrymandered.
They're not likely to win a majority in the House.
Right. Maybe in the Senate.
Or in the Senate, yeah.
I agree that the polarization is there and that it's important. The gerrymandering is, well, the gerrymandering is as old as the Republic, practically speaking. But it is, these days, it is particularly blatant and unapologetic. And
it's a good description of it.
Finally, it's symptomatic of a larger process that involves both parties. For the last 4.5 decades, since about 1970, maybe the oil crisis of 73, 74, it has become increasingly apparent to people of power that resource depletion, environmental degradation, uncontrolled population growth taken together mean that there will be ever less to go around. And if you look at the history of American public policy, ranging from taxes to regulation over that period, they have dedicated their efforts to a politics that's given them ever greater advantage in terms of wealth and political power, including a substantial measure of control over supposedly democratic elections.
You raised some interesting dimensions of it that we ought to give some more thought to. One other question that I would pose, and it's a slight shift from that focus, but getting back to the federal establishment again, the discussion, the proposal about shifting alcohol, tobacco, and firearms to justice, where the FBI resides. What are your thoughts as to why that might have come about? And I think it's important in the larger context that we're talking about.
Well, it seems to me that the larger issue here is coordination of investigations and prosecutions among different agencies. And it's not only ATF, also the DEA.
DEA.
Yeah. And whether
Yeah.
the FBI is in the best position
Yeah.
to do that. And then also whether Congress can effectively control and challenge the FBI should problems arise there. And then sort of political issues, the backstory, the NRA has opposed this transfer while recognizing the inefficiency of the ATF.
Which is particularly interesting.
Because
Yes.
there's concern
Yes. that
civil liberties are protected by that inefficiency and that gun rights will be at risk.
It strikes me that the overarching theme of today's program, which was not planned, is corruption.
Yeah.
And the ATF is an agency that's had a lot of problems since the first Clinton administration, at least. But it is one of the many agencies that, federal agencies that have basically been demoralized and corrupted over the past 35 years. It probably started before 1980, but its sort of obvious beginnings are with the first Reagan administration. When people were appointed as heads of cabinet departments and regulatory agencies, and their mission was to see to it that the agencies didn't do their jobs. The point being this. Sending the ATF over to the FBI is not going to address that problem. It's simply going to obscure it.
Well, also, as you pointed out in a conversation earlier this morning, it's somewhat related, the decision by the Texas legislature in the authorization of guns on campus in the University of Texas system.
Yeah.
On one hand, we talk about a lack of regulatory powers and regulatory responsibilities, and at the same time, we generalize the availability of guns. It's really interesting.
Yeah, my only thought about that is that, to put it bluntly, no sane person who has experience with guns wants amateurs running around college campuses with their bags and baggage.
Particularly if they know professors who give them Fs on a fairly regular basis.
Yeah, we've already got enough grade inflation. Thank you very much.
Well, interestingly enough, though, the proposal to have the Senate confirm the ATF director, who would be in charge of overseeing right,
all of that, yeah.
all of that,
Yeah.
came with the Patriot Act and was in part an attempt to limit and has been reapproved as an attempt to limit the Obama administration's control over guns.
Over guns, yeah.
So
the
we have
irony,
multiple intersecting
yeah,
issues here, national security, civil liberties, bureaucratic inefficiencies, and, as you mentioned, government corruption.
There is a culture of fear among gun owners, not all of them, of course, but I can tell you that after the election of President Obama in 2008, ammunition began disappearing from the shelves of gun stores. It just got really hard to get. Prices went up, of course. And certain kinds of weapons also became harder to get. This is a telling commentary not only on the NRA, which has a huge building across the river from Washington, D.C. They don't manufacture anything, but they've got this enormous building which bespeaks power and influence. And But it also says something about the culture of fear that's become so pervasive among Americans. And,
Okay. I think on that note, we'll have to call it quits this week. I hope you've enjoyed the program, and please join us again next week.